Before addressing the legitimacy of the time-stamped audio, for those who may want to skip ahead, it's important to first review what we know so far. Juan Brown of the Blanco Lirio channel, among others, has pointed out that post-crash photographs appear to show the right-hand nose baggage door missing. That immediately raises two questions. Where did that door go, and why does the number 2 engine show such extensive damage? This combination is noteworthy because there is clear precedent. In 2024, a Citation departing Barranquilla experienced the opening of its right-hand nose baggage door shortly after liftoff. Items from the compartment were ingested into the number 2 engine, resulting in severe damage and engine failure. The crew returned safely and landed using the remaining engine. An even earlier event in 2007 ended tragically when a Citation stalled shortly after takeoff. The crew had become distracted by the noise and visual disruption caused by an open nose baggage door. It is important to note that on legacy Citation models, forward baggage doors are not electronically monitored. There is no cockpit indication if the door is not properly latched. From a human factors perspective, this is a poor design outcome. A single missed step can separate a normal flight from chaos. That makes it critically important for pilots to verify these latches during the final walk-around, immediately before closing the aircraft door. Anyone familiar with the aircraft can open the baggage compartment. It does not necessarily have to be a pilot who failed to latch it. Complicating matters further is the fact that there were 3 pilots on board, creating ambiguity about who was responsible for checking that door. There is, however, a partial answer. The pilot in command is ultimately responsible for ensuring that someone has secured the compartment. Ideally, that check should be done personally. As of now, the NTSB has not stated whether the baggage door was found elsewhere in the debris field or is entirely missing. The only official statement has been that all 4 corners of the aircraft have been accounted for, meaning the wings, tail, and primary flight control surfaces. This does not imply that every component has been located. Early in an investigation, that level of reconstruction is impossible. What it does mean is that there is no evidence of a major in-flight structural failure. There was no wing separation, no tail separation, and no catastrophic loss of flight controls. A major airframe breakup has effectively been ruled out. The aircraft departed from runway 10 and attempted to return to land on runway 28 after approximately 10 minutes of flight. Weather conditions were marginal. VFR, ceilings around 2,200 feet broken, visibility near 5 miles, and light drizzle. The twin-engine jet impacted terrain roughly 1,800 feet short of the runway. The flight departed at 10:05 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and crashed around 10:15. The aircraft, N207BW, was operating under Part 91, and the airport is located roughly 30 miles north of Charlotte. While the Citation II normally requires 2 pilots, a single pilot exemption does exist. Publicly available information suggests that the pilot in command was either not qualified for that exemption or had only recently become so. Regardless, there would have been very little time for a single pilot to manage an abnormal event, run checklists, brief a return approach, and account for single-engine performance limitations. Although 3 pilot-rated individuals were on board, only 1 held a Citation-type rating. Dennis Dutton, a 67-year-old former Delta Airlines captain. Public records indicate that Dutton required a qualified second-in-command to operate the aircraft. The regulatory framework governing the Citation II under Part 91 is complex, which is where confusion arises. Because the aircraft was privately operated and not carrying paying passengers, it fell under Part 91. Under domestic Part 91 rules, a second-in-command does not require a type rating under 14 CFR 61.55b, provided certain familiarization and landing requirements are met. Dennis Dutton's son, Jack Dutton, was also on board. FAA records show that he held a single-engine private pilot certificate with a recent instrument rating, but no multi-engine rating. Greg Biffle, meanwhile, did hold a multi-engine rating and could have served as second-in-command if he had met the familiarization requirements. Given the investment required to earn multiple ratings, it is reasonable to assume that Biffle intended to fly the Citation himself, with Dutton serving as the experienced pilot in command, likely also satisfying insurance requirements. The NTSB has confirmed the presence of a cockpit voice recorder. While CVRs are not required under Part 91, this aircraft had previously operated under Part 135, and the recorder remained installed. The NTSB almost certainly already knows who was seated where. The rest of us will have to wait for the preliminary report. My assumption is that Dennis Dutton occupied the left seat, with Biffle normally in the right. However, there is an additional human factors complication. Jack Dutton was a junior in Auburn University's professional flight program. The desire for a father and son to sit side by side in a twin-engine jet would have been strong. It cannot be ruled out that Jack, despite lacking the required qualifications, occupied the second pilot seat. If so, the operation would have fallen outside regulatory compliance. This brings us to the audio recording. Several days after the crash, an audio clip of unknown origin surfaced, allegedly capturing transmissions from the accident flight. The clip gained credibility after a large aviation outlet published it, stating it had been submitted by viewers. There is no established chain of custody for the audio, which is an immediate red flag. That said, the recording has one significant factor in its favor. Technical analysis strongly suggests that it originated from actual VHF aviation communications rather than a studio recreation. The noise floor, static behavior, and bandwidth are consistent with a direct radio capture, not a phone recording of a speaker. There are no echoes, spatial cues, or phase artifacts typical of external recordings. Normally, aviation audio online comes from live ATC monitoring networks, which retain recordings for several days. Something this dramatic would typically surface almost immediately. The absence of early circulation and the lack of social media discussion until roughly a week later raised legitimate questions. If the clip is a hoax, it is an unusually sophisticated one. Such a fabrication would likely require an airborne transmitter and a dedicated ground receiver, well beyond the effort of most hoaxers. For that reason, I do not believe it is fake, but I am not convinced of its provenance either. The transcript itself is odd. The repeated use of the word issue without specifying the problem is atypical. In genuine emergency calls, pilots usually state the failure explicitly. That said, a baggage door opening might be something a pilot hesitates to broadcast. Another strange phrase is the repeated statement about getting our gear down. Lowering the landing gear is a routine action and not something normally announced over CTF. Even if this represents only one side of a two-way exchange, it remains unusual. Despite the absence of the word Mayday, the tone clearly suggests an emergency. The NTSB later confirmed a text message sent by an occupant stating that they were making an emergency landing, yet has not acknowledged any pilot audio indicating the same. That omission is difficult to explain. Toward the end of the transmission, the audio degrades in a way consistent with an aircraft flying extremely low and losing line of sight to the receiving antenna. This is followed by what appears to be airport personnel advising other traffic that the airport is closed. That segment is noticeably higher quality, consistent with a direct recording from a ground-based VHF radio. These details strongly support authenticity. Yet in subsequent press briefings, the NTSB spokesperson avoided acknowledging any emergency declaration by radio. That omission is difficult to view as accidental, especially if the voice on the recording belongs to a younger individual. If accurate, that raises uncomfortable questions about who was speaking and whether the aircraft was being operated legally. That said, under Part 91, second-in-command requirements are loosely defined. A pilot may technically qualify while lacking meaningful proficiency. In a real emergency, such an SIC provides little practical safety margin. Turning to the flight data, matters become even murkier. Flight Radar 24 shows only 24 ADS-B points across the 10-minute flight, with a significant gap. ADS-B's change displays a more erratic and complete track, including extreme climbs and descents that likely reflect reception errors caused by terrain masking rather than actual aircraft performance. The most reliable data likely comes from the filtered Flight Radar 24 track. It shows the aircraft descending from around 2,000 feet with airspeed peaking near 187 knots before decreasing. Even with an engine failure, the combination of reduced airspeed and descent suggests that thrust was intentionally reduced. If a baggage door had opened, this would make sense. The crew would want to return immediately while keeping airspeed low to avoid further damage. After descending roughly 300 feet, the aircraft resumed climbing and accelerating while turning west of the field. Over about 20 seconds, it climbed 350 feet while gaining 19 knots, consistent with single-engine climb performance for a Citation II. The simultaneous acceleration raises the possibility that both engines were still producing thrust at that moment. Post-crash imagery shows significant foreign object damage to the right engine fan blades. Investigators will determine whether that damage resulted from tree strikes or from baggage ingestion. Regardless, the initial climb profile is consistent with both engines operating normally after takeoff. If the baggage door was unsecured, it likely opened as the nose pitched up, creating a low-pressure area over the forward fuselage. Depending on how the compartment was loaded, there could have been a delay before any item departed the compartment, or the scenario may not have occurred at all. These questions should be addressed in the preliminary report. Although the weather was technically VMC, it was marginal: low ceilings, drizzle, and limited visibility. The crew was not in contact with ATC, suggesting they were not operating IFR. Had they been, controllers would have provided vectors, altitude protection, and an instrument approach. Instead, the flight path suggests a possible attempt to remain below the clouds, a known risk factor in Part 91 accidents. The final data point places the aircraft low and abeamed the airport on a base leg for runway 28, seconds before impact short of the runway. Ultimately, this accident does not hinge on a single dramatic failure. It hinges on margins and how thin they become when several small factors align. A baggage door that may or may not have been latched, a single pilot exemption that may or may not have applied, a second seat occupied by someone who may or may not have been legally or practically capable of helping.